Good evening, and thank you for joining us for Roseville Electric's virtual rate proposal workshop. I'm Erin Fry, Public Information Officer for Roseville Electric Utility. This is the first of 3 public workshops that we're hosting to discuss proposed rate increases beginning in June of 2024. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to go through some housekeeping items. First and foremost, we will have time for questions at the end. You can access the Q&A section by clicking on the chat feature with the question mark in the top of your screen, at which time someone from Roseville Electric will answer your question or save it for our presenters at the end. We will also post the frequently asked questions on our website later next week, in addition to the presentation tonight. We do want to let everyone know that our workshop is being recorded, and as we mentioned, will be posted at a later date for those who missed this evening's presentation. I'm going to now pass the presentation over to our Assistant Director, Eric Campbell, who will begin tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Erin, and good evening. And again, I'm Eric Campbell, Assistant Director with Roseville Electric, and I'm joined by Joanna Cucci, our Finance Manager. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I just want to acknowledge up front, be very transparent that we are proposing an increase to our rates. We've undertaken a comprehensive study analysis of our current cost structure, and what we think those are going to look like going forward. Many of those costs, like our labor and power supply costs, are quite known and measurable in the near term. And we're actually forecasting a shortfall when we match that up with the revenues that we're expecting to collect, over the next couple years. So again, we are proposing a rate increase. This is a last resort for us. We do not like to come to you all and propose an increase, but we're in a situation where we do need to increase rates upon approval to keep the organization solvent and being able to continue to deliver on reliable electricity. So first off, anytime we put together a proposal like this, a rate proposal, we want to make sure we're in alignment with our City Council strategic plan. The strategic plan for the city has a number of different goals, strategies, and we've chosen to align ourselves with the City Council goal to remain fiscally responsible in a changing world. That's particularly relevant to us. In the electric utility space, we're subjected to power supply market cost across the globe. So for instance, if something happens in Europe or there's an attack by Russia on Ukraine, that really reverberates back here in the States. And there's really kind of a cascading effect, and we see the impacts of those types of things, right here at home. Next, City Council strategy. We've chosen the strategy to balance our utility operating costs to maintain competitive rates, and this is something that it's forefront for us. It's at the forefront of our minds, if you will. We're always thinking about the decisions that we make and how those impact our rates. And then finally, here our departmental mission, and that's to deliver safe, reliable electricity at competitive rates with exceptional service. And really, the message there is we really have you at heart here. When we're putting these proposals together, it's really to make sure we deliver on this mission to this community. Next is our City Council rate policy. We go before our City Council periodically to have them review our rate policy, and these policies really help direct, our view on rates. How we structure them, how we develop them. What the whole intent is, what we get cost recovery on, those types of things. And so there's a number of different policies here. The first one here is cost-based policy. And really this gets back to the idea of doing a cost of service analysis and having a pretty good idea of where our costs are, and how we match those up with the revenues that we're collecting from our customers. Next is adequacy policy. And this is very simple. Are we collecting an adequate amount of revenues to cover our cost? And this is no different than the budget that you all have at home. Managing your personal budgets, your household budgets, things like that. It's just a high level check to make sure that we have sufficient funding to cover our costs. Next, fair and equitable policy. And this goes back to the cost of service analysis. We want to make sure that there's no one customer group subsidizing another group. We have 5 different customer groups, if you will. One is the residential group, and then we have 4 flavors of commercial. And we go through a lot of analysis to make sure those groups are not subsidizing each other. And then lastly, the stability policy. Our preference is to make incremental rate increases. However, it's become much more difficult to deliver on that particular policy with the volatility in the power supply markets that we've seen over the past couple of years. And we'll get into that into more detail later on in the presentation. And then what we are proposing in terms of the proposed rate actions, the first item here is I want to take you back to December of 2022. We brought forth to the community, to City Council, a proposal to apply a 8% energy surcharge, and that went into effect. It was approved. It went into effect in February of 2023, and that was entirely based on the volatility that we were seeing in the power supply markets. And in many ways, that dates back to the time when Russia first attacked Ukraine, and that just rocked the energy markets across the globe. And we saw those impacts here at Roseville Electric. Those pressures, those upward cost pressures that we were seeing in the power supply market back then have not subsided. And what we're seeing now is that those costs are not going to go away. So we're proposing that the surcharge become permanent. As we proposed it initially, it was only going to be in place for 23 months. It would have expired later this year, December of 2024. But what we're seeing in the power supply market is these costs are not subsiding as we had hoped. And all that volatility that we were seeing a couple years ago when we put this in place, it's still present in the marketplace. The second part of this is we're proposing 2 9% rate increases. If approved, the first increase would go into effect on June 1st of 2024, and the second would be January 1st of 2025. Now, again, power supply costs are a big part of this, but this is also being impacted by inflation. Some of the costs that we incur to do business, labor cost, inflationary cost on our equipment side, the cost to run our business essentially, and so it's been a while since we've had an increase with respect to some of those non-power supply costs, and you're seeing some of those surface here in this proposal. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna Cucci to walk you through our financials.
Good evening. Looking at our financial forecast on the slide right now, you can see what our finances look like without the proposed rate increases. In FY26, you can see that surcharge rolls off. We lose about $10 million in revenue. And as you can see on the bottom line number, we're $30 million negative starting in FY25 without the proposed rate increase, running up to $76 million in FY28 without these proposed rate increases. We are seeing large increases across a couple of areas. As you can see, the power supply expense line increases through FY28 by almost $30 million. It does increase a little each year, but the end number is about an increase of $30 million. And we have been talking about these power supply increases prior when we discussed the surcharge. But as you can see on this slide, they do continue to increase. Basically, this is looking at approximately a 27% increase in power supply expenses from FY24 to FY28. So that is a large increase. It is our largest category of expense. So when we do see increases in that line item, it tends to be a large increase. The other lines are generally being driven by inflation. So operating expense is being largely driven by inflation, labor market changes, and things like that. So that's where the 2 main drivers are for this cost increase. We do actually also have some investments in capital coming up that will also need to be funded. Looking at the 5-year financial forecast with the proposed rate increases. So this includes extending the 8% past the end of 24, and then also the 2 9% as Eric discussed. As you can see, this changes our entire financial forecast. We remain positive in both FY25 and FY26. We do start to see a slight negative in FY27. That is pretty small compared to the numbers on the previous slide. This slide looks at the average monthly customer bill impact per rate class. Looking at the residential class, the current bill, which does include the 8% surcharge, the average bill is about $130. Following the June 1 increase, it would be $142, and then $154 following the second 9% increase. So for a total of about $24 increase to the residential class on average. Looking at the small commercial class, this is classes such as coffee shops, salons, some of the small businesses throughout the city. The current bill for this class on average is $178 a month. With the surcharge. And then after the first 9% increase, it would be $195 and then $212 after January 1, which is the second 9% increase. Looking at the medium commercial class, this is things like grocery stores, gyms, drugstores, that type of business, that size of business. They're looking at $3,400 as their current bill. On average, $3,700 after the first increase and $4,100 after the second increase, for a total increase of about $652 a month. Large commercial, this is things like big box stores, high schools, some of our larger customers. Currently on average monthly, they're paying about $34,000 a month. That goes up to $37,000 and then $40,000 following the 9% increases, for an increase of $6,386. And lastly, our industrial class, in terms of count, this is our smallest class. In terms of energy uses, this is one of our largest classes. So this is things like large EV charging stations, manufacturing, the city's wastewater treatment plants, those types of businesses. The current average bill for that type of customer is $115,000. It goes up to $126 after the first 9% and then $137 after the second 9%, for average increase of about $22,000 per month. This next slide shows how Roseville Electric rates compare to neighboring utilities by customer class. So looking again, the residential class, that $154 is after the second increase, as you saw on the previous slide. In PG&E, that same usage, the bill would be about $354 per month, or 56% higher than Roseville Electric. And then SMUD would be slightly lower after these two actions, 1% lower. This does include some rate actions that SMUD is taking. SMUD has planned 4 rate increases on January 1 of 24, so that one just happened, 2.75. And then in May, they're doing another 2.75, and then they're doing the same thing in 2025 with a January 1, 2.75 and a May 1, 2.75. So those are all included in here. So with SMUD's rate increases and Roseville's proposed rate increases, the two utilities are pretty on par for the residential class average bills. Looking at the small commercial class, Roseville is slightly cheaper than SMUD with a 3% benefit over their SMUD rate at $212 versus SMUD's $218. Again, looking at PG&E, we're looking at about $474, which is 55% difference. Generally, PG&E is about 50% higher than both SMUD and Roseville Electric, so we do have a large benefit over PG&E. And then with SMUD, most of the classes are in line or slightly lower rates than SMUD customer would see. One thing we are proud of is if you're a Roseville Electric customer, on whole, our customers save about $175 million compared to what they would pay if Roseville was a PG&E service territory. So that's $175 million that remains in our community to be spent on other things. Looking at why this rate increase is needed, we mentioned some of this at the beginning and throughout the presentation, but we are seeing persistently high power supply costs. These haven't come down like we hoped when we presented the surcharge originally, and they continue to increase going forward. As Eric mentioned, natural gas is subject to global market forces. Natural gas exports are expected to rise 30% between 2022 and 2024. So that's what we've already seen, but then also double by 2028. So natural gas will continue to be exported from the United States. And so those market forces are driving the cost of natural gas. We had a lease with the Department of Water Resources for some land at the power plant where they put some peaker units. That lease has expired, and that was about $4.5 million a year that we were receiving from the Department of Water Resources. So with the expiration of that lease, that is revenue that has reduced going forward. We have seen a rise in equipment costs. This is kind of what everyone is seeing across the board due to inflation. We're seeing this in food, we're seeing this in cars, but we're also seeing that in equipment that the utility needs to purchase. Looking at something like a residential transformer that's placed in a residential subdivision. In 2020, we were paying about $4,000 for a residential transformer. Today, we're paying $18,000 for a 350% increase in a transformer cost there. Looking at something else, such as a distribution switchgear, it went from $23,000 to $43,000, so basically an 85% increase. So we are seeing major increases in the costs of equipment we need to purchase for maintenance and repair and replacement. And so that has increased a lot of our operating costs. We are looking to put about 0.5% a year into our rate stabilization fund. As we discussed when we did the surcharge, we did use a chunk of funding from the rate stabilization fund to pay off a piece of debt. And so we are trying to rebuild the rate stabilization fund now so that we can in the future use that fund to mitigate some rate impacts and rate shock. And then finally, the labor market, just generally increased costs across the labor market. There are a number of positions at the utility that are very skill intensive, such as linemen and operations staff. And there's a lot of competition for that type of labor. So we are seeing labor market increases, just general ones, and then also the specialized labor that it takes to run the utility. This slide looks at the average price of forward power purchases. So basically, this is a 36-month forward look at prices. As you can see, back in 2020, when we were looking at price increases, we were around $40 per megawatt hour. And then looking forward, you can see that now if we're purchasing power 36 months forward, last fall, we were looking at $80. So that is basically a doubling of the cost of forward power purchases. So this, we were hoping to see this come back down when we proposed the surcharge, but it has remained at an elevated rate. And we, at this point, don't see that coming back down and need to make changes to the rates to adjust for that. This slide shows the forward gas price. We use natural gas to run our power plant, but in addition, generally, the power market does follow the price of natural gas, whether we're buying power or gas. The trend in the natural gas market does feed into those prices. Looking at this, it's a little harder to see the trend, but taking some comparisons of timeframes. In summer of 2019, gas was $2.54. And in July of 2027, we're looking at $4.97, which is a 97% increase in the price of summer gas. Looking at winter, we're seeing an even larger increase. In January of 2020, gas prices were $2.64. And in January of 2028, we're looking at $6.39, which is a 142% increase in the price of natural gas. So when we're looking out these years where we're purchasing power now, the prices have increased 100+%. Just to provide some background on how the utilities expenditures get broken out, this is basically a quick look of what we spend our revenues, so the rate revenue on. Starting with the large chunk, that's power supply and generation. So this is the actual power that we're purchasing or generating to pass on to customers. That's 55% of our budget, which is about $113.5 million. Next, we have administration and customer service. This is everyone from our executives to our customer service team to our meter readers, finance, so a large group of the support teams, as well as the customer service teams that you see out and about. That is 14% of our budget, or $27.9 million. Next chunk is distribution. This is our linemen, our crews, our operations, all the equipment that supports them. That's 12% of our budget, $25.4 million. Capital is our capital investment into the system. That's 10% or $19.7 million. Transfers to the city is our franchise fee and other expenses the city supports us in. We use some city departments to support the utility, so we do fund those items, and that's 6% or $11.8 million. And lastly is debt service, $7 million or 3% of our budget. But pulling out from this circle, our labor is $43.7 million, which is 22% of costs. Labor is a large chunk of our costs, but it is definitely not the largest chunk of expenses that we see in the utility. Largest expense is always power supply and generation.
All right, thank you, Joanna. Much appreciated for that. And I know some of you have submitted some questions in the chat box, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. Back to the presentation, actions to mitigate cost increases. We know this is not a great time to bring a rate increase to you all. We have done what we can internally in terms of mitigating these increases, and we wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a flavor for those types of things that we've done internally to mitigate some of these significant cost increases. The first item here is portfolio optimization within hedging program. A lot of words there, and really what's happening there is we hedge either power or natural gas 3 years out. So we have strips of, whether it be power or lots of natural gas that we lock in those prices now, and it gives us a pretty good idea of what our cost structure is going to be over the next 3 years. And if you relate that back to the financials when Joanna walked through them, and you saw what the effect was of these rate increases, we look pretty good through FY26. And so, and a large part of that is our hedging program, leveraging that, to lock in cost, to avoid, some of these spikes later on. Secondarily, we're also looking at some off-peak system capacity sales. And really what that is we're using our infrastructure, either the peaker units potentially, REP, our Roseville Energy Park, or assets we own within NCPA. When we're off peak, when our customers are not using those resources, we look to offload, some of the capacity that relates those to those assets, and that generates some revenue for us. It's something that we're getting more familiar with, and we're really hopeful that there's a lot of opportunities in the future in this bucket to offset future rate increases. Next is energy market pricing and outage management synchronization. And this is really, timing our outages with our Roseville Energy Park to be the best time in terms of market pricing of purchase power. Because when the plant's down, we're going to have to purchase power, of course, and so we're working very hard at, aligning the outages with, when it's most advantageous to us to be buying purchase power, and obviously avoiding, the summer months. Next, adopting technology where feasible to reduce expenses. A good example is our advanced metering project. Our advanced metering project is really automating the whole meter reading function, and so we were able to reduce some positions from that perspective that we no longer will need going forward. So we've been able to incorporate those savings in these projections as well. And then lastly, holding staffing levels steady. We have not added any new positions for a while. What we've been doing is repurposing existing vacancies on a highest and best use basis, more or less living within our means, and so it's been important to us to hold the line in terms of staffing, and that's been a significant way for us to limit cost increases. Next, what happens if the proposed rate increase is not approved? And we're not recommending that the increase not be approved, but there's some pretty significant issues that could arise if the proposed rate increase is not approved. The first one is degradation of our service reliability. We have fantastic service reliability here in the city of Roseville. It's reliability that that most utilities would kill for, if you will. Very high reliability. It's a great retention tool for business. It's a great tool to attract business here, things of that nature. Second is there'd be a significant erosion of our financial metrics, and why that's important is we need to make sure our financial metrics remain strong for when we actually go out and borrow money to finance future investments. We want to make sure we have that option, to increase our liquidity as needed. And then lastly, difficulties in future energy procurement. I mentioned, how we look out, 3 years out from a hedging perspective, and our credit quality factors into that quite extensively. If we weren't credit quality, we wouldn't be able to lock in some of those items, or we'd have to post a letter of credit, and it would just put us in a real nasty situation where costs would be much higher than they are today. Next, and this is an important piece for us, is our rate assistance program. We know that these increases hurt some of our families here in the community, especially those in the low income bracket. So we do intend on maintaining a 15% discount, if you will, on those rates. Part of that is introducing a permanent $15 reduction, so it will not fluctuate with usage. Those customers will get that $15 reduction, regardless of what their usage is. Next, our rate assistance programs. The renewal is typically 2 years that we ask folks to renew their application. We're going to extend it out to 3 years, not ask people to come back as often. And we think that's going to increase participation, slightly. And you can see the benefit there. And then lastly, we're going to allow for some additional flexibility in the income verification documents as part of these programs. Be a little more liberal, if you will, in terms of the documents that we require for folks to be approved to be on the plan. If anyone on the call is interested in any of these rate assistance programs, please feel free to reach out to our customer service team. And then one last item here, the calendar, kind of what the road ahead looks like. Right now, we're in the midst of our community outreach that's going to occur in the month of January and February. We have 3 workshops. Erin mentioned those earlier. There's going to be 2 virtual. We have tonight, of course, January 4th. Our next one's going to be January 25th. That'll be a virtual event. And we're going to have an in-person event on February 8th. There'll be some additional information on that at a later date. January 18th, we're going to be meeting with Arcona. That's the Roseville Coalition of Neighborhood Associations. We'll be presenting to them on, again, January 18th. January 26th, we're going to get in front of the Chamber of Commerce. We're going to be meeting with them to answer their questions. And so there'll be opportunities for you all to engage with us and to provide feedback. And, depending on, some of the questions we get, some of the responses, we may, actually hold some additional workshops, based on need. And then with that wraps this part of the presentation up. I want to, thank everyone for your attention, the questions that we got in the chat box, and we'll jump into the questions now. Erin, do you want to walk us through those?
Definitely. Thank you, Eric and Joanna. And again, thank you for the questions. Those that joined us after the meeting started, you are able to submit questions. We have plenty of time left for this meeting. You can access the Q&A by clicking on the chat bubbles with the question mark inside, at which time you can place your question in the announcement box on the bottom. So please submit those now. For those questions that need further follow-up, we'd be happy to do that after the meeting as well. We will also post responses and put our recorded presentation on the website beginning next week. To get into some of the first questions, I'll go ahead and pass this along to Eric and Joanna. Can you answer how much of this increase is based on future ERV charging demand on our infrastructure?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Joanna, and that's an excellent question. There's virtually none of this increase is related to that to EV charging in the future. That whole construct, the cost around that increased demand it's really a one-by-one situation where some of the larger chargers will pay a fee to attach to our system. So we really don't have costs built into this rate proposal to support additional EV demand. We do, however, have some assumptions in revenue where we do expect to collect additional revenues around EV charging, but we don't see that becoming really a material amount until further out in the future.
Great, thank you. An additional question in regard to the increase and moving forward with 9% compounded increase over 12 months, why not have an incremental increase over several years?
Yeah, again, another good question. And I know I mentioned earlier on, we weren't really in alignment with our incremental policy. It's really about getting the revenue back to the utility sooner to maintain our financial metrics and our solvency as a utility. If you look back on the financial page that Joanna discussed that reflected these increases, you'll notice that we are now solvent, in FY25 and FY26. With not, the incremental approach will not work. It won't give us the same desired outcome, if you will. And we'll actually be in a situation where we'll be at a deficit if we try to stretch these out over a longer period of time.
We have one more question in the chat box, but as I mentioned, plenty of time to address any other concerns or questions from those participating in this evening's meeting. You can access that on the top in the Q&A button and enter your question on the bottom. Some concerns during the presentation in regard to the cost of equipment and increases that the utility is experiencing. What is the utility doing to improve the competitive bidding process?
Well, we do use a competitive bidding process. I mean, that's something it's policy with respect to the city of Roseville, and so all our contracts are competitively bid. What we're seeing, though, there's a lot of supply chain related issues in the marketplace, and so we talked about transformers, for instance, earlier. There are orders that we placed upwards of 3 years ago, and we're just taking delivery of those transformers now, and we're seeing those types of delivery times across all of our vendors and all of our different materials.
Thank you, Eric. Again, if you would like to ask any questions about the presentation this evening regarding our proposed rate increase, feel free to enter that information in the Q&A box at the top of your screen. As a reminder, this is the first of 3 public workshops that Roseville Electric will be hosting through January and early February. The first 2 are virtual, and our last offering in early February will be an in-person event. More information will be shared about that. We are also available to engage with other groups. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our contact information is on the screen. You can connect with our customer service team by calling 916-774-5300. You can also find all of the materials, additional information, and tonight's recording on our rates webpage, which is also listed on the screen. Seeing no additional questions, we will wrap up this evening's first outreach meeting. We thank you all for joining us on what is a very busy time of the year. Oh, we do have one more question. I will pass that along, Eric and Joanna. How much of this overall increase, with the 8% remaining in place after January of 2025 and the 2 9% increases, how much of those increases are due to people and the housing growth? I know that's an issue that we've heard, especially in recent years with the tremendous growth in West Roseville.
Yeah, and I neglected to address that earlier. I had intended on mentioning that early on in the presentation. These proposed rate increases have no connection to new development. And I know there's been some concerns around that in the past. How we view new development here at Roseville Electric is we ask them to pay their way. And so we don't have our other customers, whether it be residential or existing commercial customers, subsidizing new development. So when they come on the system, new housing communities, things of that nature, they pay for that infrastructure as it comes on board.
Great, thank you. We also received an additional question in regard to when this proposal will be going to City Council. Our current plan is to conclude, our community outreach in mid-February, at which time we will take recommendations to our Roseville Public Utilities Commission, which is also a public meeting at the end of February, and then move forward with our action to City Council in March of 2024. So that is our current timeline. And we are happy, as we mentioned before, to add any additional meetings or speak with groups as needed in regard to this topic. So as a follow-up to the growth and what we're seeing, there's no additional equipment purchases that are related to the growth that has an impact on the utility, Eric?
No, and really it gets back to that's the basis of the fees that we charge new developers. It's for the additional equipment that's being installed on our grid, if you will. There, like a new substation, for instance, cost upwards of $20 million. We're pushing that back to developers, and that's not something we're pushing onto our existing customers. We hold our existing customers harmless, from those expenses.
Thank you. I'll give participants just another couple of minutes if there's any additional questions. Joanna and Eric, if you could answer again what the comparison looks like, or perhaps we can go back to the slide in regard to how these proposed rate increases, how Roseville Electric will compare to neighboring utilities such as SMUD and PG&E.
Sorry.
We'll get that presentation back up on the screen here to show how the impact of these rate increases compare to both SMUD, who is another municipal utility, so modeled as Roseville Electric in the community, as well as PG&E, an investor-owned utility. And as demonstrated on the slide previously, with these increases and proposed increases for both PG&E and SMUD, Roseville Electric will remain anywhere between 45 and 55% lower than PG&E, depending on the overall customer class. And you should be seeing that content now on your screen here shortly. And then for SMUD, the other municipal utility in the region, we will remain very comparable to their prices within 1 to 7%, as you can see.
Yeah, and even beyond, this is Eric again, and even beyond these comparisons, when we look at Roseville Electric's rates compared to other municipal utilities throughout California, we're in the top 3 or 4 utilities in terms of lowest rates, across the state. So we feel very fortunate, to be able to deliver a product at this price to you all. We really, it's a, really, you get the bang for your buck in terms of what you're receiving at this price.
Thank you again. And we can understand from our customers and appreciate your feedback this evening and joining us. We understand the impact this has on our customers and are working diligently in the future to ensure that our infrastructure is safe and reliable as our customers have come to expect. Again, we appreciate you joining us this evening for our first of 3 public workshops. If you have additional questions or would like to join us at an upcoming workshop, we have a virtual meeting on January 25th, also a Microsoft Teams live event, and an in-person meeting here at the Roseville Electric Customer Service Center on February 8th. We also will post the recordings of both virtual meetings on our rates website, which you can see currently on your screen. And for any questions in regard to the rate increase, follow up, or information regarding our electric rate assistance program and how you can find out if you are qualified for that, including the $15 credit that is a part of this proposal going to City Council in March of 2024, please feel free to reach out to our customer service team Monday through Friday at the number on your screen. Again, thank you so much for your participation. We appreciate the feedback. It is such a critical part as your public power provider here in the city of Roseville. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.